accountability is critical to the success of every single construction project. And in order for that accountability to work between the contractor, the owner, the subcontractors, the project partners, there must be transparency. My guest today is Adam Stark. Adam is a founder of Jet.Build, and along with his co-founder, Adam has recognized inefficiencies in the construction management process based on his years of experience as a practitioner of construction management. And before his career in real estate, Adam served in the Israeli Defense Forces Special Forces and obtained a bachelor's degree from Northeastern University and an MBA from New York University. I mention that because in our discussion today, we begin with an overview of this idea of accountability and how it has to be driven and committed to by all players in a construction project. And then we take a very interesting turn later on in the interview, and you need to stick around to make sure that you get this, into Adam's experience in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Force, and how that has influenced the way that he functions in the construction industry. We talk about learning accountability in extreme circumstances, the skills of communication across teams that he learned in the IDF, as well as the importance of structure. We talk about what does and what doesn't translate into the construction field from his experience in the Special Forces. And then we take a deep dive into how to use concepts of developing people, someone who comes in as a raw recruit to someone who's an effective Harry personnel person, how we use those kinds of concepts in developing talent in our construction company. So the conversation is wide ranging. That's what I'm getting to here. And I want you to listen to each part because each one can give you great takeaways to help you to be more successful as a construction company owner and leader. So check out my conversation here today with Adam. I know you're going to enjoy it. Share it with other people that you think will benefit. And thank you for listening to Construction Genius. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Adam, welcome to Construction Genius.
Eric, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure. It's so interesting. I was just having a conversation with a large general contractor, and they were asking me to really dive into the need to create a sense of momentum in their projects and how a lot of the project managers are struggling with that at the moment. And we began to talk about accountability. And I know that's a topic that you're very passionate about. And so I'd like to dive into that today, the link between accountability and successful construction projects. So in your mind, what is a good definition for accountability?
Totally. This is a great topic. And this is the thesis of why we created Jet.Build. So for me, the definition of accountability will be transparency first and foremost across all project stakeholders. So what that means is the ability to quickly look and understand who is responsible for what across the project.
Okay, so transparency and accountability are linked together. That can be a challenge many times because it immediately makes me think of conversations I've had with contractors where we're making sausage over here. And we don't necessarily want the client to see exactly how we're making the sausage. We just want to present them with the sausage. So how does someone navigate that kind of tension there?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's certainly nuances as it relates to what kind of access or exposure you want different teams to have. So there's a fine line in terms of what the, let's say, owner should be seeing, the design team should be seeing, and the contracting team should be seeing. So in a simplistic way of controlling that environment and allowing for everybody to dive into their micro responsibilities is access control technology. That would be my means of answering that in a simple way.
Okay. And so it's interesting though, because you immediately linked accountability with transparency, and I wasn't anticipating you going that way. And so tell me a little bit more about why is transparency in construction?
Absolutely. So as we all know, there are multiple companies involved in a construction project, right? So the necessity for collaboration needs to happen. And that means everything from bill logistics coming in from external companies that have no involvement on the job site to contracting teams all coming from different companies to design teams working from their offices, builders from their offices, and you keep going and going there, where there's job site necessity for collaboration, off-site necessity for collaboration, and for all of these components to combine. And in that area of combining accountability, combining responsibilities, if transparency exists, then everybody knows who to reference when needed. Everyone knows who to look to when, project is being bottlenecked or if next steps need to occur. So the transparency across the companies is relevant when needing to understand how it's impacting what you're doing and vice versa.
Okay, so let's say I have that transparency and I'm building a project, I'm a project manager. I understand, let's say I'm a general contractor, I understand which one of my subs is not delivering on their promises, or I understand how there's an outstanding change order that I need to negotiate with my owner. But let's just ask this question. Why do we struggle so much with accountability, even when we have all of the data that we need to see what's going on in the project?
Certainly. Yeah. First and foremost, I'd like to give us in the industry a little bit of credit and slack in that crazy response that I just gave, which is to recognize that it's pretty unique to other industries, just on top of mind, one could imagine or think of, where we do have to collaborate across so many companies, also from job site to offices, in what is not necessarily safe environments, which is logistic heavy, which also has impact from, let's say, weather, right? So lots of uncontrolled factors, lots of different companies are involved, different departments. First and foremost, cutting some slack there. And then secondly, in recognizing that, seeing that there's complexity involved with obtaining accountability and obtaining productivity across all of these stakeholders. We'd like to, JetBuild here, what we'd like to provide teams is this essential layer of accountability, is to say, okay, there's functions that are going to happen no matter what across a project on a basic level, right? So you have middle process, you have schedules, you have budgets, file sharing, drawing sharing, etc. So why don't we cover this in a really simple way that everybody could understand, right? Meaning if you use a smartphone, for example, you should be able to understand this. And therefore, let's start with this baseline and cover this need for transparency across teams to the degree that's relevant, right? Like permission setting, which then allows for accountability across those teams as well, which will then allow for better productivity. So it's trying to attack it from that baseline.
Okay, so in your experience working in the industry, which of the hubs of a project, so you got your subs, your owner, your contractor, your general contractor, which of the hubs, where should accountability begin in terms of making sure that it's as effective as possible? Because sometimes subs feel like some of this accountability is out of their control. Maybe they got their act together, but the GC is out of control. Where should it lie to begin with?
Totally. I came from the perspective of the developer, the owner, and my role was to be very active on job sites, right? So it was basically the point person for the accountability across all stakeholders, which is why I'm coming in at this angle of recognizing all teams need involvement. So I'm going to place the responsibility on the owner. And the reason that I say that, owner is the one hiring all of these teams. So the owner is the one who needs to say, hey, teams, hey, design teams, hey, lender, hey, whoever it may be, ourselves, right? Ourselves as the owner. We all need to respond in the time frame that allows for the success of the project, that allows for teams to continue on their roles.
Okay, so the immediate problem that I see with that many times is owners have unrealistic expectations, and they have a project that's being built, and all of a sudden they think, no, I want it done differently, and so therefore now I'm going to bring the change to the table. And now I'm going to expect the general contractor to bend over backwards and not give me any additional money. I know I'm painting with broad strokes there, but I think the audience can relate. Tell me, as a general contractor, what do I need to do as I begin to work, particularly with a new owner, to establish lines of communication and accountability that will ensure that regardless of how the project goes in terms of changes and the ups and the downs, that I can maintain a healthy relationship with all the project stakeholders?
Yeah, totally. Great point. What we are trying to do is eliminate, and what I tried to do it when I was working in the industry was eliminate that finger pointing game. And I think that there needs to be an awareness from all sides that, this element of finger pointing and pushing people to an extent that they can't perform because it's unrealistic, it quite literally helps no one, right? First of all, to have, I'll call it boundaries of what's possible. And I think in establishing boundaries of what's possible, this collaborative platform, collaborative transparency allows for that to occur. So that's, again, tackling this baseline element where you can establish who's responsible for what and when. And then when responsibilities change or when they're bottlenecked, how that impacts everyone. So again, back to that concept of transparency is that potentially if owners can see that and how their decisions are impacting their project and their schedule and their budget, that could end up just naturally, organically assisting the contracting team.
Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by the boundaries of what's possible.
Sure. In terms of if, for example, a developer has the ability to see logistics behind it, it doesn't have to be to a micro level. It could be even macro, right? Just macro scheduling, for example, macro proposals of budgets. So if they can understand and see how their decisions will, in a, I'll call it proactive manner, affect downstream of the project, then that will cause hesitation on their things that may be unachievable for any realm of realistic reality. So what I mean by that, for example, is if there is this level of transparency, then a contractor, for example, could combine or have support from design teams, because they're also going to be impacted, reflect what a change would look like as it relates to a schedule and budget, and then allow for a developer to make that decision thereafter.
What kind of rhythm do you think a project reporting rhythm and meeting rhythm should a project be in order to ensure that this level of transparency, accountability, and communication is maintained?
Sure. It actually surprises me whenever I have a discussion with a developer who is what I call this very hands-off type developer, and they don't have context of what's going on their job sites aside for maybe a monthly report. So I would say that's not great. I'm used to the perspective of being literally every single day on a job site and having that understanding so that these issues or these friction points don't occur, right? So that reactions and decisions could be made from understanding what's happening in reality and how performance is being achieved. So I would suggest at a minimum twice a week to understand the nuances of what's happening on a project.
Okay, so twice a week. And would you recommend that's in person, or are we doing a combination of in person and Zoom? What's up with that?
I definitely think in person is better. We're very much a relationship-based industry. We're talking about manual work. So I think it's really important to show face, as we call it, as the saying goes. With that said, there is obviously times when builders are doing projects in different states, and maybe that's not accessible for that individual, the literal owner. So I would suggest in those cases, hire a representative for you who's going to be there more frequently. So I definitely think on-site is super important, at a minimum twice a week, if not more.
So in your experience in your career, you started in, just give us like the 30-second synopsis of your career, because I think this will help us with the questions I want to ask here real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started off as a project manager owner's rep for a developer in New York City, role being to be on job sites every day and ensure that accountability exists across all of the company stakeholders, all of the project stakeholders. I was doing that for about 7 years and came to abilities of managing projects in its entirety. Everything from bringing on contracting teams and design teams to reporting to lenders. So very much that point person to really what we're talking about, right? Understand how this ecosystem of process of operations work and how project success occurs.
Okay. So give me more of the developer owner's perspective. Where did general contractors drop the ball the most?
Great question. I would suggest that occurs when a developer is not, based on what we just said, right, is not showing up on site enough to understand what's happening and shift dynamic accordingly. So dropping the ball could be things from not having collaborative scheduling for their subs occur in an effective way. If logistic issues happen, which are not always a contractor's fault, but the developer, if they're not on site every day, they're not seeing that and understanding that. And that obviously then creates a domino effect of just madness, right? So I think the ball that gets dropped is scheduling piece. Beyond scheduling, I would say that it's out of control, which is logistics. And coming from New York City, the logistics element was something that very frequently happened.
It's really interesting there. So let's say I'm a general contractor. I've contracted with an owner who is a little bit hands-off and yet demanding. So they do the swoop in. They swoop in and then they swoop out. And they just swooped and I'm like, okay, great. So this changes everything. I think my first piece of advice is don't work with those types of folks. But let's say I am working with them and I have a contract and therefore I'm committed. What steps can I immediately take as a contractor to begin to try and modify the behavior of the owner?
Definitely. What I would suggest is, again, this thesis, not to be annoying here, but the thesis of JetBuild, right, is so you have a platform that is allowing the developer the opportunity to have insight into what's happening, but then also allowing for the contractor to report to the developer in a simplistic manner. So if you have a central product, a central software that assists you in all of your collaborative and operation aspects, it also will provide very clean and simple data to then report to the developer to bridge that gap that might exist.
Hey, this is Eric. Hope you're enjoying my interview with Adam. I know that I am. Quick commercial break, and we are sponsored today by my book. Haha, Construction Genius. This is a great book. Let me tell you what one contractor did with this. He purchased 10 or 15 copies for his leadership team. They have a book club, and they read 4 chapters a month. That's what they did. And so they got through the book in 3 months because it's got 12 chapters in it. And then they had a book club where they discussed the book and the applications that they got from the book. And that really helped them to lock down the learning that's in it. And the great thing about this book is that it is hands-on, practical, simple, and no BS. In other words, when you read it, you're not going to have to wonder what I'm talking about. You're going to get it right away. And it's going to help you to be a better leader. It's going to help you to be more effective in sales and marketing. It's going to help you to be more effective in your strategic planning. So what you need to do is go out to Amazon and buy the book. And you need to purchase it for yourself and for the leaders in your organization. And then take the example of general contractor and start a book club. Read the book together as a team, discuss how you're going to use and apply it. And I promise you that it will have a tremendous positive impact on you and your organization. Now let's get back to the interview with Adam. So in your experience, what are the 1 or 2 things that general contractors don't say to owners and developers that they need to say?
I think realities. I think you should not be afraid to speak a reality, meaning don't say yes to everything if it can't be accomplished. I think that puts you in a hole down the line for that project and then also for future.
Okay, that's a great answer. So here I am, then I'm a general contractor. I've got a relatively new project manager on site, and perhaps their inclination is to say yes. The owner comes in, the owner's a dude or a dudette, and they've got power. And I'm just going, yes. How can I train my project managers when to say no and to say it in such a way that they don't alienate the relationship with the owner?
Great question. And it's actually quite simple. The answer is always, if you're not sure, say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure. I'm going to check and I'll get back to you same day, right? If you have pressure in terms of timing and need to respond, say, I'll get back to you later today.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So create that buffer so that they can consult back with their leaders and make sure that they're all on the same page with the answer. Okay, so let's go even layer deeper. I have in my mind a subcontractor, a friend of mine, or a company that I've worked with for almost 2 decades now, and they have this phrase in their head: "We run the job." Okay, we run the job. And they're a framing contractor, right? The reality is that they've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on around them, but they view it as, I'm going to work with the general contractor. I'm going to let them know what my scope is and how that's going to fit in with the overall execution of the project and where I'm coming in. And I'm going to do my very best to even negotiate with the other subs so that we get to get our stuff in a way that makes money for us, but then also benefits the project. So let's say I'm a sub then, and I'm looking up at the GC or looking at the GC, and the GC doesn't have their act together. The owner's kind of out of control. As a sub, what do I do then?
That's a really tough situation. I think in that scenario, so I'll say 2 things. One is, if you're working with a very difficult owner, then you're in a tough spot, right? Because that would probably mean the owner is not really active on the job site, doesn't actually see what's happening, and will just point fingers. If you happen to be working with a developer who is hands-on and who is supportive and of their own project, right, thus being supportive of everyone, then I would say it's very likely that the developer recognizes that. I don't know if the right thing to do would be go directly to the developer. It would be strange to me if the developer wasn't aware and adjusting however they can accordingly. And what I mean by that is, if I were in the developer shoes and I saw that scenario, meaning I see my subs performing, but my GC being a bottleneck, then I would, quite frankly, take matters in my own hands as much as I could, as much as contract allows, or as much as communication that I have directly to the subs. And I would try to circumvent the GC as much as possible, to be honest.
Interesting. That's interesting, huh? So establishing the relationship with the owner directly and allowing that to influence the project.
Totally. In this ideal world, right, like we talked about a few minutes ago, is the owner is on site, right? So if the owner is on site, you as a sub have opportunity to meet the owner, and you really should. And just naturally so, the owner being on site, you performing, that will become very obvious.
Yeah. It's interesting. I have a scenario in my mind where, contractors, we're recording this in 2023, and COVID's over. And contractors weren't really impacted by it in terms of their ability to go and work, but perhaps they're working with owners, with architects, with engineers who are still in this either a hybrid environment or in a in a remote environment. And so they're reluctant to come onto the job site, or they're just not used to coming on the job site. And there's this friction that can't be overcome. Do you have any tips or insights into how a in-person, on-site team works with that remote team?
Absolutely. I actually just came up with, in my head, I realized the great answer is, I know you had an episode a few weeks ago or a few episodes ago with contract under. I would suggest you bake that into your contract. Bake into your contract a necessity for site visits. And I think that's really important. COVID, regardless of COVID, honestly, it's a must. Yeah, just bake it in.
See, that's really good. So be proactive and say, hey, listen, if we're going to build this project, if you guys want it on time and on budget with the quality that you want, you've got to be on site. So we are not going to accept the remote work kind of thing. You must be on site, and we're going to put that into the contract.
Absolutely. You know what? I'd even suggest that if you want a negotiation piece for yourself, start with every day and let them negotiate you down to 2 to 3 days.
That's interesting, because even with I like the fact that you're at 2 to 3 days, because some owners, they might be thinking, I'll just show up at the meeting once a week, a project meeting, and everyone's just nodding their head and going through the motions. But it's really interesting, because I do think that owners bear a ton of responsibility here to make sure that their projects are moving forward in the way that they want. And that does require for them to be much more involved than perhaps they think.
100%. I'm frustrated that I'm blanking on the source of this, but I just recognized, I'll see if I can remember the source, but I just realized several articles relatively recent in the past year, and I think even more recent, reflecting exactly what you just said in terms of project success when an owner is more involved versus less involved, project success when an owner is taking leadership roles, etc. I'll try to find that and send it to you.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. I want to take a little personal pivot here. I know before you started your career in real estate, you served in the IDF. Is that the Israeli Defense Force?
Correct.
Tell the audience a little bit about that, because you were in the Special Forces, is that right?
Correct.
Can you speak to that at all in terms of how that's informed your experience in construction and how you found that useful?
Absolutely. And my co-founder also actually was in Airborne. So I was in a Special Forces unit within Airborne. Co-founder was in the brigades of Airborne, so paratroopers. So we served at the same time in the same brigade, same division. He was in the brigades, I was in Special Forces. Anyways, beyond that, in terms of very translation into business, I'd love to join efforts, or just say this gospel per se, of that should very much be considered as experience. And that goes for quite literally any type of business, any type of role. And the reason I say that is just on a very macro scale. What it does for you is a bevy of things. One is it teaches you how to be structured, how to be accountable for yourself. Second is it teaches you, in so long as you're able to come out of it in a positive light or have positive takeaways, psychologically that is, it teaches you accountability in extremes. And what that means is, for me, I know what I recognized when I ended up in real estate development on construction job sites is that when issues were occurring all the time, because naturally they happen, it's less stressful because what you're used to is way more extreme than that. So that kind of scenario could occur in any industry where a stressful scenario happens in the office space. And how do you react to that? How do you remain in a calm state to be able to make a good decision to move forward? So in that capacity, very helpful. Another capacity that it helps is on communication with people that you weren't necessarily communicating with or around. It exposes you to a lot of different people, a lot of different environments, and you have to learn and understand how to communicate to anyone and everyone in a bevy of environments. So lots of macro ways that really support you as an individual, supports you in your professional career as well.
Okay, so let me just summarize that then. The idea of having a structured environment and understanding how a structure works, the idea of accountability in extremes, I really like that. That was good. And then communicating with a variety of different people. And it's interesting because I would imagine, and help me if I'm wrong here, I imagine in Special Forces, you have a very precise goal that you're looking to achieve. And in order to achieve that goal, you do require support from a variety of different outside sources. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios. Something that actually does a great job of summarizing the, connectivity between Special Forces and businesses is this book called Team of Teams. Highly recommend that. And they talk about how allowing special operations teams in particular, but teams to be autonomous, to make informed decisions, and then collaborate accordingly across your business units. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, another book I'd recommend, I know many of us are familiar with it on this podcast, is Extreme Ownership. And that's by Jocko Willink. And a couple of episodes ago, you guys need to check out the episode that I had with Jeremy Beal. Jeremy actually fought under Jocko in Ramadi. Yeah, yeah. And so he was on the podcast talking about how luck is not a tactic. So check out that podcast episode as well. So let me ask you the contrary question. What are a couple of things from the military mindset that don't serve you in terms of the construction industry?
Definitely. Easy. One is you have to make the separation and recognize the separation, which, by the way, is very difficult. And it takes, honestly, years for most people, if they get, some people, not their entire lifetimes, is separating what it means to be a civilian versus to being a military operator. So different worlds, right? You don't want to be a military operator in civilian life. That does not work. So that's first and foremost what comes to mind. Second is probably rigidity. So it's kind of similar in ways, but also recognize that there's way more flexibility in your day-to-day civilian life. And so I'll say those two pieces.
That's excellent. Let me ask you this. From the time you went into the forces to the time you came out, was that a couple of years you were in? How long were you in for?
Yeah, 3.5 years. Yeah.
Okay, great. Would you say that how do you think your levels of courage, either physical or psychological, developed through your time in the forces?
Immensely. So back to that concept of exposing yourself to extremities. And just for context of anyone listening, it doesn't have to be military. So you could look at athletes that are pushing their own limits, whether it's climbing mountains or climbing walls. When, it's to a science to agree, this sense of flow state, the sense of reaching your edge, which then allows you a lot more recognition of what you can do and what you're capable of.
And then how did that then serve you? Because I think of, obviously, in the military is focused around being successful in conflict, both physical, psychological, material, all these kinds of things, and then personally and as a team. How did that serve you when you came into the construction industry? And the construction industry seems to be, in many cases, just one conflict after another, whether it's severe or not so severe. How did that help you to navigate the conflicts in construction?
Definitely. It's similar to anything, right? It's essentially this concept of you practice something enough, and then anything that is less than what you practice is now simple for you. It's easier for you. Take it to, you do 5 push-ups a day for a week. Day 8, you would expect to be able to do more. So in a similar kind of a capacity, if you're able to create that separation between what it means to be a military operator versus a civilian, now, unless you have a conflict on your job site that's to the extremity of being in military ops, which you probably won't, then now it's simplified for you in the extent that you've practiced and experienced what is more.
Let me ask you this then. Okay, so you join as a new military person, and obviously you don't know nothing. I'm assuming you weren't like someone who was brought up with a military mindset. You went into the IDF because that was your duty to your country. Am I correct there? Okay, so you come in and you're just a dude, right? And then they develop you over time. Okay, so let's paint this picture then. I've just promoted someone from a project engineer just to a project manager. Okay, so they're no longer just the run to Home Depot and get some stuff and go be my gopher. You're now going to be stepping into this role where maybe I'm going to be having these difficult conversations with subs and owners and all these kinds of things. What perspective should a company take in the developing of their project manager to ensure that they can develop in a way that's effective for them and for the company?
Definitely. And first of all, structure is very supportive to be able to step into a role. So if you're a hiring manager, for example, be sure that you have structure of what you'd like to see accomplished and how it could be accomplished for whoever it is that you're hiring into that role. That's one. 2 is I'd also recommend that you ask this person or mandate this person in the sense that you could tell them if you want to move up, you have to do shadowing, right? So if you have that person shadow you for time, that's up to you, that time frame in terms of how complex you think it is or isn't. And then gradually you could essentially abilities to that person over that amount of time.
Okay, give me more on the shadowing. I think it's a very vital concept. I think it's something that people miss. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak to my perspective, I guess, coming from the developer side. So if I had hired someone to come work on my team, up front, it would be to say, hey, I need you to tackle XYZ, training, et cetera, whatever. They're tackling that in their environment typically. Now, if I'm expecting that person or wanting that person, or they're showing a desire to move up in the chain of command per se, then I would ask them to, hey, join me in this meeting tomorrow, write down your takeaways, and then I'd run through that with them. I could even suggest what they should look for. There's lots of ways you could continue digging in, but it's basically just allowing that person the opportunity to gain exposure to what you're doing.
Yeah, it's fundamental. It's fundamental. And everyone should be practicing this type of strategy to help develop your people. That's excellent. So tell me a little bit more about JetBuild.
Absolutely. So coming from that space, being that point person, as I like to call it. And by the way, crazy enough, my co-founder has almost literally the exact same story in terms of military, in terms of how he started his professional career. And that's how we came to building Jet. When we were on job sites, we were that point person between all of the stakeholders. And we were recognizing how crazy it is to attempt to manage this process with email chains and Excel files. People working in siloed environments, lots of manual entries, difficulty to understand accountability, no transparency across teams. All of these just madness issues and bad operations, I'll call it. We went to the market to try to understand what existed. Lots of legacy products that were really pricey, and we weren't okay with shoving that into our budget. We wanted to allow space on budget elsewhere. And that's when we said, you know what, let's just create a solution that will allow for all the contracting teams, design teams, developer teams, lenders, et cetera, everyone to collaborate on one platform, run through their abilities, assign accountability as they need to, and collect that data, right? So that's the thesis of how Jet came, is we were literally building it for ourselves as the operators on job sites, understood as we added features, understood what was working, what wasn't working, how these features were working, and just grew the product over a few years, basically for ourselves. Once we had a complete product after a beta phase, after a handful of design clients, we released it to the market, and then Jet to the market, and then more recently raised a round of capital with Shadow Partners, really awesome VC focused in real estate tech, technical guys as well, a technical team. I highly recommend that you check them out.
So tell me, where does your product, Jet, where does that sit in terms of, let's say, a larger scale project management software or something like Procore or something like that? How do those integrate?
Yeah, absolutely. Being a new tech stack, so being a new technology build, very simple and easy for us to integrate with any third party, with any other company. And actually, our vision here, our goal is to be, if you could imagine, a smartphone with an app store. So our goal is to create this backbone technology structure for operations, then allow for the integration of any nuanced product. So in terms of ability to integrate with any legacy product that exists, we're very capable and happy to do. Another question would be is if you even need that legacy product. If it's a broad project management tool, you might not. Jet might be able to cover your needs entirely.
Excellent. Excellent. So tell us how we can get in touch with you guys.
Absolutely. Our website, jet.build. So not jet.com, right? .build is our domain. And you'll see a contact form there. My email is adam@jet.build. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm active there. Yeah, lots of ways to connect. LinkedIn, our website itself, or just directly via email.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So we'll have all those links in the show notes. Appreciate you sharing those. Adam, quick question. I know you're in New York City. Are you in New York City itself? Okay, so I'm coming to New York City sometime, and I'm in the city, and I've got to go to one restaurant. And let's say I don't want to kill my budget, but so I'm not looking for $1,000, $2,000 tab. I'm all right with a couple hundred. Where am I going to go for dinner?
Oh, well, great question. Are you with a group?
Yeah, let's say I'm with a client. So it's like a client dinner, and it's not like a group get down. It's just like a client dinner.
Totally. Actually, a really easy option always, and they always deliver, is the Smith. They do have a handful of locations, so I almost hate saying a place that has more than one location and is super unique, but honestly, they always have a good environment. They have a few locations which actually supports a visitor being, if they're in a certain area and if they're with a client. Yeah, that's a good option for sure.
That's beautiful. I appreciate giving us that option and being brave enough to give one with multiple locations. But I got the Smith Restaurant website. I'm going to put that in the show notes. And so folks, if they're in New York City, they can go check that out.
Awesome.
Adam, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your insights. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise, Eric. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, this is Eric. Thank you for listening to my interview with Adam. Before you bounce away, make sure you check out his website, jet.build, for the work that company is doing. And also the restaurant recommendation, the Smith Restaurant there in New York. We'll have links in the show notes. Also, don't forget to check out the book that every construction leader should be reading, and that is Construction Genius. Effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. Go to Amazon, purchase this book. You're going to love it. It is totally awesome. Thank you again for listening to Construction Genius. Feel free to share this episode with other people who you think will benefit from it, and have a terrific week.